Welcome back to City Speak. As a bonus episode this month, we are sharing an SCDC podcast from our partners at the Municipal Association of South Carolina, which features an interview with Irma Esparza Diggs, NLC's Senior Executive of Federal Advocacy. Irma reflects on the importance of creating partnerships, including how NLC's Federal Advocacy team works with Congress and the administration to meet the needs of local governments as a potential federal government shutdown looms. We hope you enjoy this conversation between Irma and hosts Todd Glover and Erica Wright.
Erica, I just have to know, what have I done to you? You scheduled this podcast recording on the morning after I fly back from Japan. I got in at 7:30 last night. I'm 13 hours still ahead of this time, and you scheduled a podcast.
I did, and I was terrified when I scheduled it, but I didn't know when else to do it. But Todd, I love you, Todd, and I knew that you could do it. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I was glad to do it. It caused me to get up this morning and shower and get going, but I am dragging a little bit today. I mean, I'll be maybe 7 cylinders, not all 8.
I told Casey on our staff that you were doing the podcast this morning, and her eyes got huge. And I said, so if it sounds like we have Barry White on our podcast, that is why. It's not Barry, y'all. It's Todd. It's Todd.
Well, Barry is my first name. Barry is my first name.
Todd, we have listener shout out.
All right.
Okay. So this is episode number 2. And we want to shout out those who have reached out to us via email. So shout out to Council Member Sherry Mara from the City of Travelers Rest, Councilwoman Vicky Fekas with Springdale. They both shared how much they enjoyed listening to the podcast. Okay. Naomi Reed on our staff, our director of our risk management services. She listened and loved it. And also Reba Campbell, who is a former Municipal Association staffer, all reached out to just share their love. So take that, Casey and Jake.
Well,
no, I'm just kidding.
We're going bacterial. We're
I like it. Todd, we were both on trips. So let's talk about your trip to Japan. What was it? How did you enjoy it? What caused you to go to Japan?
It was through a exchange program that the government of Japan has for local government, and they bring in local leaders from United States and Canada to engage with local governments in Japan to talk about issues facing local governments. It was fascinating to learn about how government is structured in Japan, and also to see that some of the same issues that they're facing, we're facing here.
Really? What?
Funding, and of course their government's structured in different ways, but they're looking at economic development. It was fascinating. We were in Yao City, which is in the Osaka prefecture, and they're having a difficult time keeping their young people. How many times have we heard workforce? I mean, their young folks are drawn to bigger cities, to the quality of life, to the different things that, and how many of our cities, battle that on a daily basis as well? How many times have we heard that? So I thought that was interesting, but got to meet some really great folks, network with a lot of folks, and just a wonderful opportunity to be exposed to that. It was I'd never been, once in a lifetime trip, and I'll never forget it.
That's pretty cool. And not to preach on the podcast, but just how people of different cultures and backgrounds walk through and deal with some of the same issues. I think we can take that and apply that in so many ways back here.
Sure.
That's really cool to hear you talk about. I too was on a trip, 24 hours in DC. Went to Senator Tim Scott's prayer breakfast, was able to talk to all of the members of our federal delegation, and they all led with, "I really had a good time with your
Nice.
members at the
Great.
congressional briefing." So that was pretty cool. And speaking of, during those congressional briefings, we would have them in one district, and those members there would share how they didn't know who the full South Carolina federal delegation was. Yeah. So if you will indulge me for about 15 seconds, we're just going to give a rundown of the South Carolina federal delegation. Some names are familiar to most, and then some are not. And so as we kind of lay the foundation for this podcast, it's important that you know these names. So we'll go in numerical order, and then Todd, I have a trivia question for you.
Oh boy, here we go.
It's easy, you're going to get it. So we'll start with South Carolina Congressional District 1, and that's Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Congressional District 2, that's Congressman Joe Wilson. Moving on up, we have Congresswoman Sherry Biggs. Congressional District 4, Congressman William Timmons. Moving into Congressional District number 5, Congressman Ralph Norman. Congressman Jim Clyburn, that's the 6th Congressional District. And then finally, the newest Congressional District is District number 7 with Congressman Russell Fry. So Todd, and of course we have our 2 senators, our senior senator, Senator Lindsey Graham, and our junior senator, Senator Tim Scott, who represent the entire state. So Todd, you probably can guess the trivia question, right?
Okay.
Of those 9 members, which ones did not previously serve in the South Carolina General Assembly?
Okay, so I know Tim Scott right off the bat. Graham served in the House. Mace served in the House. Wilson served. Fry did. Timmons did. Norman did. Clyburn ran, but was unsuccessful.
Okay.
He was not in.
He was not.
So that just leaves me with Biggs.
Ding, ding, ding. That's right. Out of our 9-member federal delegation, Congresswoman Sherry Biggs and Congressman Jim Clyburn are the only 2 that never served in South Carolina General Assembly.
Nice. So I'm off to a good start.
You are. You did well. Everyone served in the South Carolina House of Representatives except for Congressman Joe Wilson, who served in the state Senate, who had perfect attendance during his 17 years. I did some research, Mr. Producer. And then Congressman William Timmons also served in the South Carolina State Senate. And so I'm looking forward to hosting some of them on the pod to just talk about their service to the state and that transition to DC. But enough of that. We have a really cool interview, our first guest on the podcast that you and I had the opportunity to have a conversation with. Todd, you want to talk about who our members are going to hear from momentarily?
Yeah, we're going to hear from Irma Esparza Diggs, who is the Senior Executive Director of Federal Advocacy for the National League of Cities. Irma and her team are basically like Casey and you and Dana and Mary Catherine are to our team here at the state legislature, and they do a fantastic job on federal advocacy, but not just the advocacy that they do there, but keeping us informed. And I know you want to talk about your interaction with Irma during COVID, during ARPA. I know you were heavily involved in that as our congressional liaison.
Yeah.
And so this is going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Same here. Let's go. Let's head on over to the conversation.
So welcome, Irma, and we're so glad to have you with us this morning.
Welcome,
Thank
Irma.
you, Todd. Thank you for having me. It's good to see and hear you both.
Good to see you.
Just to give you a little, I met Irma almost 6 years ago now when I became executive director of the league here. Well, I say municipal association. Most of the other states are called leagues. I took the job in November of 2019, and literally a week later came to City Summit in San Antonio. And that was my first introduction to Irma and Clarence and the NLC team. And now have the honor to be on the NLC board as one of the region reps. And it's been wonderful to get to know Irma and her team and to be in DC with them. So I'm looking forward to this one today, Erica. Thank you for setting this up. I think it's going to be very informative to our listeners.
Same here, Todd. Irma, I'll share my Irma story. Back with the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law here with our membership and even with the state General Assembly, everyone looked at me as the quote local expert for the American Rescue Plan. But for our listeners, Irma is why I felt like I was so confident in the American Rescue Plan. We'll talk about it during the conversation, but her and her team were boots on the ground in DC negotiating the American Rescue Plan Act. And then I want to say every Friday, Irma, we were on a conference call with you, and you shared with us everything that we needed to know, and then we were able to share it with our members and legislators. So I'm one of the fans, the Irma Esparza Diggs fan club. But Irma, tell us, we're going to get into the conversation, but we just want to learn more about you. Tell us about yourself and how your pathway to the National League of Cities.
Thank you. So first of all, it's so great to be with you all today. And I remember those days vividly. We were doing those calls every Friday, and I want to say almost every day we were also doing individual briefings with states around the country, in addition to those calls with all of the municipal associations. And for me, before I get into like what led me to NLC, I'll just say that partnership, that bond that was formed during such a critical time in our nation's history when there was a national shutdown, information was key. Yeah. And you all having a direct line to city and town leaders, and us being in the know of what was happening here, there was no better partnership to keep the support for the people doing the real work on the ground. And so for that, I am most proud. I have been with NLC almost 8 years now. I am actually a native Texan, and I moved to DC to go to school and a long time ago. And I like to say I grew up professionally in Washington, and I have bounced back and forth between working for members of Congress and working for 2 presidential administrations and also working for city government. And I have to say, the best job I've ever had was working for local government. And so when the opportunity presented itself to come and advocate on behalf of people doing real work all across the country, I just jumped at the chance to represent them here in Washington and be their voice.
Do y'all feel this way? I know, well, to me, the days of CARES Act and ARPA and COVID, it seems like 15 years ago.
Yes.
I mean, it was just 5 years ago.
I know.
Mean,
I feel like I've aged 15 years too, and that's
right. Well, I used to say when I was in local government that every year it was like dog years. So every year you were in local government, you had to multiply it by 7. And I feel like COVID probably did that to us all, but it just seems so long ago. And I was traveling, like I said, this past week, and I saw people wearing masks, and it was jarring because we're not seeing that a lot here in the U.S. And it just brought me back, and I was thinking, gosh, we forget about everything being shut down and being lucky to find rolls of toilet paper and food. It just seems so long ago. But Erica, you're right. I mean, we were in just the time since you've been here, we were on weekly calls with NLC and trying to see what was coming down the pike with CARES Act and then ARPA.
And just so our members know the significance of the National League of Cities and why we have Irma as our first guest, I told her I was going to read this sentence from her bio, but it was under her leadership, NLC secured $150 billion in direct federal assistance for local governments through the American Rescue Plan Act. So that direct funding that cities and towns received from the American Rescue Plan Act, that was Irma and her team at the National League of Cities. Mm-hmm. Real quick, I know we have questions outlined, but what was that like, going to Congress, going to bat? Because remember, CARES Act, a lot of our folks didn't get direct allocations. And honestly, we had to go to the state on a reimbursement level.
Mm-hmm.
But then we saw the American Rescue Plan Act, and that was the first time not just metro large cities received direct allocations, but even our small cities and towns. And there was even that provision in law that the state couldn't interfere. I feel like you wrote that in there too. What was that like? Like, knowing you and how you advocate for our members, I just think it's important to connect the dots to our listeners and what you did for us. Take us back to that time, and what was that like, making sure that all of our cities and towns received direct funding?
No, you're exactly right. And if you remember with the CARES Act, and this was during a time of a national shutdown, so all communities, like everything just came to a standstill. Local businesses had to shut down, corporations. And so for those communities that are highly dependent on sales taxes, or who were delayed in bringing, meaning their municipal budgets were highly dependent on everyday taxes that are coming in, as well as those that had begun to see delays in property tax collection. They were hurting and having to make tough choices between how often could they continue with trash pickup at the same time where, trash was just collecting at people's houses because people were home. There was a real strain on emergency personnel, police and fire rescue, everybody, and just everybody was making calls. People were working overtime. What we saw was, from a national perspective, municipal governments soon began to make hiring freezes, lay people off, because there was no revenue to sustain municipal operations. And so the CARES Act only provided direct funding to municipal governments with a population of over 500,000. And in this country, there were only 36 cities that met that threshold. And so that meant that every community had to wait for the state to disperse it, if the state dispersed it at all. And because the original legislation of the CARES Act, and you're right, Erica, we were really intentional about the language we used in the state and local recovery fund. States didn't feel like the legislation directed them to apportion a part of that funding over to local communities. And so what we saw was just a very disparate disbursement of funds to communities who were very much in need. And frankly, it wasn't sustainable because local officials were on the ground responding to constituent requests for food, for housing, for rental assistance, for emergency health assistance, at the same time that they were doing COVID testing, provided vaccines. There was just so much strain on local leaders, and we needed our federal government to step in at that point and help, which is what resulted in us making the case for direct federal assistance. And a big part of that, I'll say this, was the need to educate members of Congress about how local governments sustain their municipal budgets and how their budgets had just come to a complete standstill, particularly for those communities that were reliant on sales taxes.
Gotcha.
Well, because Erica, weren't we were in a race with Wyoming to be the last state to draw down CARES Act money. I think we were
the third last to draw
I thought
down.
So. That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So and our state was being very methodical in its planning for how they were going to disperse the funds, which that's great. No problem. We participated in that and we're happy to do so. But we lost out on a lot of interest on that money from just letting it sit out there with the federal government before we drew it down. And so really do appreciate the work that y'all did with ARPA to make that a direct allocation to the cities where we didn't have to go through that process again.
I'm glad it was there. And, in addition to that funding meeting the emergency public health needs, it also allowed and gave local communities the flexibility to meet their water, broadband, and wastewater management infrastructure systems. Like, they were able to actually invest in it, which was a welcome hand for many communities.
Well, we jumped into the American Rescue Plan Act. And if we can, I want to kind of step back a little bit. Todd and I and our team, we've been doing a series of congressional briefings where we bring a member of the federal members in district to meet with all of their electeds. And they've gone really well. Out of our 7-member House delegation, we've had 5 participate. And inevitably, someone would stand up and introduce themselves as the new mayor, or I've been elected for 2 weeks, and this is my first municipal association meeting. So for those members and others, can we take a step back and just provide an introduction to the National League of Cities? For those who may not be familiar, can you give us an overview of the National League of Cities and the role that you all play for our cities and towns?
Yes. Thank you for that question. So, first of all, the National League of Cities just celebrated our 100th anniversary last year. We are an association, a membership association that also serves as the leading advocacy organizations for local governments. We represent more than 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the United States. We work to amplify the voices of local governments on Capitol Hill and with each administration, those federal agencies, ensuring that federal policies that come out of Washington reflect local priorities. Through our Federal Advocacy Center, of which I'm the director, we work directly with Congress and the administration to shape legislation and regulations that impact municipalities nationwide, working to not just advocate, but to educate members of Congress and the administration on not just the capacity, but how can we make the federal government easier to use for local governments, and how can we maximize the return on investment of every federal taxpayer by going directly to communities to meet local needs. Our membership, and I said this at the beginning, in this country, there are only 38 cities with a population over 500,000. The majority of local municipal governments represent populations no greater than the size of 15,000 in population. And so the majority of communities in this country, municipal governments, are really small, and the capacity varies greatly. And so what we do also as an organization is we provide technical assistance. So making sure that local governments know how to use and access federal programming. We do training as well, especially for small and rural communities. We release research and data analysis to help showcase what our CEO, Clarence Anthony, says next practices. How is it that communities are meeting their infrastructure needs, their housing needs, their public safety needs? We offer grant navigation support. From a federal advocacy standpoint, we focus on infrastructure, housing, public safety, broadband. During the opioid fentanyl crisis, we developed resources to help local leaders meet that critical need in their communities, as well as advocating for it. So we do a lot of member education, not just of local leaders and anybody who is elected or appointed. Mayors, council members, agency directors should come and are a part of our national conventions and our convenings and our webinars, but the information that we provide not just helps to develop them professionally, but also connect them with what's happening in Washington so that they can truly make informed decisions that will impact their community for the better.
And Todd, you're on the board of directors for the National League of Cities. I'm not sure our members know that. Todd, can you talk about what that's been like? How long have you been on the board?
Yeah, I just came on here recently. I think I've only been to one board meeting. Unfortunately, I missed the summer board retreat because it was during our annual meeting in July. It's been eye-opening. It's a large board. There are members from across the country. There are large cities, small cities. There are affiliate groups that are represented there, and so I think it's been really helpful to hear the diversity of opinions and approaches to things that, Irma, you're talking about, I think 38 now, you said cities over 500,000. 70% of our 271 cities in South Carolina have a population of less than 3,000. So we understand. I mean, I always tell folks, problems are problems, and we do encounter a lot of the same things. It's just a factor of adding zeros on the end of either your population or your budget. And whether you're 3,000 or 30,000 or 300,000 or 3 million, there are some things that we are united in experiencing. Now, we know that there are things that larger cities encounter that we don't have in our smaller cities, but it does tend to make me feel a little better in that when we're at these board meetings and I hear the problems that other states and cities are encountering, that we're not in this boat on our own. I always feel like that somebody out there might have the answer, or maybe in some cases we do. But I think it's been helpful to be exposed to that. I've enjoyed the time. And also, too, I think it's important to point out from the National League of Cities standpoint, I was on this junket to Japan last week, and the CIO for the National Conference of State Legislators was there with me. So we were talking about the Big Seven. Irma, could you talk a little bit about that? I know that NLC is a part of what quote unquote Big Seven, and I don't know that many people know what that is.
No, and having worked in Washington for over 20 years, I learned about the Big Seven coming to the National League of Cities. So essentially, and it's very much inside the Beltway speak, it is 7 organizations that represent state and local associations. So National Governors Association, National Conference of State Legislatures. At the local level, we have, and then there's the Council of State Governments. And then at the local level, you have City Managers Association. You have National League of Cities. Yep, U.S. Conference of Mayors, and then we have our county partners, National Association of Counties, and it really is a virtual table where we as legislative directors, as well as the CEOs, engage on almost a weekly basis on shared issues about what's happening here, and we are often each other's not just thought partners, but work together collaboratively. It's not often that state and local associations can all sign one letter to Congress, but when we do, it speaks volumes. And we really work to get there most often. But we have monthly meetings as legislative directors, and the CEOs also meet routinely as well.
That is so incredible. Irma, I remember the first time I went to your office and I saw that the National League of Cities shares an office building with the National Association of Counties. And I remember just stopping in my tracks and I'm like, collaboration, people. And then you also share like your main conference room. But that was an intentional decision, right?
Yeah, in fact, I just was on a call with the new USDA Rural Development Director out of Colorado today with Clarence, our CEO, and he shared how he and Matt Chase, who is the CEO of National Association of Counties, were intentional when we were identifying new office space to come together and really to showcase how local governments do work together, not just at the national level, but how we can be a model for how we work together at the local level, given that there's just so much overlap in priorities. And frankly, local leaders, whether you are elected to your county or your city or town, you have to be able to work together, particularly to leverage partnerships at the state, at the local level, the federal level, as well as the state level. We're only one person, but when we work together, we can just maximize our limited dollars that we have to be able to meet huge priorities.
And we know that we've told our members when they band together, there's power in numbers. And when the Big Seven signs off on a letter, it gets congressional notice. I mean, they pay attention when there's a letter with those 7 signatures on it. So I enjoyed spending time with Brian and talking about how even as a state association, we could work closer together with NCSL as well. Talk about maybe where things stand right now where's the attention of Congress right now and where we are on September 22nd. I know there was the August recess, and that's when we did most of the federal gatherings that we did here. But now things are starting to come back, starting to get back in the groove. We got a budget the federal fiscal year ends end of this month, right? In a week.
It does. It'll be here, I feel like, in just a matter of days. Essentially, Congress has a deadline of the end of September to pass a budget. Otherwise, we will face a shutdown beginning October 1st. And right now, there is a proposal on the table, which is quote unquote a clean continuing resolution, and by clean, that the Republicans have proposed, and the Republicans are in the majority in the House and the Senate, and by clean meaning there's nothing, it just keeps the budget going like a stopgap budget bill. It doesn't fully fund for FY26, but it gives Congress more time to go and get the full appropriations bills passed. Democrats are holding out because they want to see some changes related to what happened with the president's self-titled Big Beautiful Bill, some of the changes related to healthcare in there. They want to include an extension on expiring health insurance subsidies, and they're also pushing for a permanent extension of healthcare subsidies that are going to expire. And so we'll see. It definitely is a showdown. The president is advocating for Republicans to move forward and just pass that clean continuing resolution. But the reality is they need 60 votes in the Senate in order to get that bill to the president's desk. So there needs to be compromise, and we'll see how things turn out. Every moment there is a development, so we will see. But we as an association, and I know you all have resources ready in the event that there is a shutdown. How can local governments prepare? And what does that really mean for federal services, and particularly for those communities that are highly dependent on tourism, where there may be federal parks? What does that mean for communication? So we have our plan B ready in the event that Congress doesn't meet this shutdown deadline.
So Irma, that you talk budget, and I'm trying not to make this an hour-long podcast, right? So we're gonna bring this to a close. But what, from the National League of Cities perspective, as you're looking at what matters to local governments across the country, what's the big issue? What's the top issue that you and your team have identified on the Hill?
I think right now there's a number of big issues. So we need to reauthorize the Surface Transportation Act, FEMA. There's a bill right now to address FEMA. There are a number of priorities important to local governments, including funding the agencies fully that are responsible for disseminating critical programs that municipal governments rely on. I think right now, what is the most important issue is that we all are watching for is to ensure that there's not a clawback of already appropriated infrastructure funds that cities have already budgeted for, that funding that has been appropriated by Congress actually goes out the door. We are at the end of the fiscal year. There are still several agencies who are still waiting on the Office of Management and Budget to clear emergency funding to rebuild back from disasters. That money needs to go out the door. Department of Homeland Security, Department of Transportation has funding that needs to go out the door. So we just need to make sure that funding that municipal governments have planned for coming into their communities from the federal government actually goes out the door, so there aren't sunk costs that municipal governments have invested, and they can continue to move forward with their priorities, their infrastructure priorities, and meet the needs of their local communities.
That's a lot. And I love how you just were able to tick it off at the top of your head. And I think our listeners can see that, we've got the right person going to bat for cities and towns on the Hill. And we stand ready to assist, particularly in preventing clawback. So whatever we can do to help, to chip in, please let us know. I think, Todd, the only other question that I have would be for those members who are learning about the National League of Cities for the first time. Irma, what would be a good first step for them to engage with you?
You know what? I am going to give out my email because I would love to have a conversation with your members about what's happening here at the federal level. And so my email is Diggs, DIGGS, @nlc.org. Email me right now. And the reason I give out my email is because there is a changing federal landscape that is going to necessitate local leaders making informed decisions with often not a lot of information. And so a couple of things need to happen. They need to be abreast of what these changes mean for federal funding coming into their communities. If they don't receive it directly, their county does, and they need to be able to know how that's going to impact them, or, decisions at the state level, what that's going to mean for local budgets. And so we can help put two and two together there. The second thing is being able to inform your congressional delegations every step of the way. Know what federal funding is coming into your community and keep them abreast as these projects are moving forward. As you receive federal grant agreements that may be different than what you signed, what does that really mean? Keep your congressional delegations as well as its administration informed about what those changes mean. At the end of the day, local governments, because they are small, the majority of them don't always have a lot of professional capacity to stay on top of these grants every day. You need a partner. So just as the South Carolina Municipal Association is a partner, so too is the National League of Cities, and we're here for them.
Great. Todd,
awesome.
Let's turn it over to you, Todd.
Well, no, I just want to thank you, Irma, especially for providing your email address out for our listeners and to provide them direct access to you, and we appreciate that. Just to let them know, we are here as well. We try to make about 3 to 4 trips a year up to DC just to touch base with our federal delegation. I remember one year we sat in the room with Senator Graham, and he asked, well, what can I do for y'all? And we said, well, we're just here to visit. We're not here to ask for anything. And he was shocked that somebody was coming to him. That's right. He sat down, and he was shocked to know that we were there not to ask for anything. And I think that's an important, I tell folks that all the time, is when you have a relationship with your congressman, when you have a relationship with your state delegation, or even each other as elected officials on a council, as friends, or people that we know, I think everybody knows that one person that every time your phone rings, they're calling to ask for something. And you know how your reaction is with what, do I answer this call or do I not answer this call? Do I really want to talk to this person because I know they're going to ask me for something? And that's just human nature. And it's the same way. And I think if you can establish that relationship with your federal delegation, your state legislators, that when you call them, it's not always asking for something. It's, how can I help you? Or here's some information that I think could be helpful for you. Or how can we support you in what you're doing? I think that two-way relationship works a lot better. Appreciate Irma, y'all's guidance when we go there. You always give us a lot of intel and a lot of what you're hearing, and you and your team. And Irma has a great group that works for her, that's up on the Hill constantly. Yes. And I know they all have their different areas of expertise, and every time we get together, they all update us on what they've been working on, and it's a lot. It really is a lot, and things we know have been moving. You know, this was a little unprecedented, Trump coming in for a second term, but not back to back. Irma, I want to ask you one last question. They certainly were probably more prepared than a new administration coming in that was right off the bat. Had you ever seen things move at the pace that it did in the first 100 days? I know that's the honeymoon period, but it seems like it was fast and furious there for a little while.
It still is fast and furious because you're right. This second Trump administration took off like gangbusters, and you can tell had really been preparing the last 4 years and has hit the ground running, moving on all cylinders in every agency, not just clearly stating what the president's priorities and vision is, but what changes were going to follow that people very much needed to get in place and be on the same page about, and be very clear about what was important to this administration. He's been successful in getting his first big bill passed. I mentioned it earlier, the self-titled One Big Beautiful Bill. Now the focus is to prevent a shutdown. And then I think they're going to try and take up another big bill through the reconciliation process, which will be, they don't have to secure those 60 votes. They just need 51. And Vice President Vance was the tiebreaker last time. And so this administration is going to work as quickly and expeditiously as they can to get some big wins on the table.
I just wanted to give my thanks to Irma.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this, not just for participating on the podcast, but for who you've meant to me, what you've meant to me personally. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your example and your mentorship. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Erica. I am always here. And Todd, I hope you can go take a nap now.
Thank you.
It was so good to see and visit and hear your voices today. Please give my regards to that beautiful South Carolina state, those wonderful mayors and council members and local leaders who just work so hard every day. I look forward to seeing you all in November at City Summit in Salt Lake City, Utah. So good to see you all. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Irma. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Irma.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to City Speak with Clarence Anthony. If you like this show, let us know. Share this episode with your friends and make sure to subscribe. We're curious to hear what you think, what you want more of, and how we can improve. If you have feedback or an idea for a guest you'd like Clarence to sit down with, send us your thoughts at cityspeakpodcast@nlc.org. Join us next month for a new episode. Like and subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.